talk about good old Game of the Year 2020-21. So if you'll remember from episode 7, when I covered this for 2020, I don't do Game of the Year the traditional way. Instead, I have 3 categories for Game of the Year in this sort of discussion. I have the year number release of the year, so in this case, the 2021 release of the year. And then there is my personal Game of the Year. And the reason that I separate those out is there's a few reasons. For one, maybe my personal game of a given year is a game that came out like years and years ago, right? Maybe it's 2032 and I finally get around to playing a game that released in 2028, assuming this is the future. And that game that came out in 2028 that I had never tried until that point was just so brilliant that I was like, I have to make this my Game of the Year, even though it didn't come out in 2021. Or 2032 in this hypothetical example here. Another reason I like to separate this out is because I think, there are some games that will release in in a given year that I just don't think makes sense to have as a Game of the Year. So, maybe there's a compilation that comes out and I'm just like, oh my goodness, I love these games so much. It's like my Game of the Year. It's the one that I played the most. It's the one that I enjoyed the most. But that really doesn't make sense for a Game of the Year now, does it? And then in this sort of scenario, actually, it kind of worked out. Because, in fact, one thing that I noticed, at least as, with these strict rules, is I kind of set myself up pretty poorly for this year, which is why I'm thanking myself for making this split here, because I want to give credit to the game that specifically was made in this given year, as well as to the game that I enjoyed the most. And since I don't want to include collections or remakes or games that are built largely on old content, that's something that I don't think we talk about enough in the game world, as we talk about like remakes, remasters, ports, that sort of stuff. But we don't talk about games that are just like, largely based on old content. So it's like a new game, but it's got a lot of old stuff reused in it. But looking back on 2021 for me, it was mostly a year of rehashed content. And, I don't want to get it twisted here, because there were obviously a lot of brand new games that came out in 2021. And of course, I have a lack of hardware diversity to blame on missing out on some of that great brand new stuff. But as far as what I enjoy, there's a lot of rehashing going on. And in fact, that made it a lot harder. That made it like really hard to pick a game of the year 2021 when I went through the list, when I realized, oh geez, a lot of what I played, a lot of what I enjoyed were old games. It's like Miitopia, I talked a lot. Well, I talked a lot about when it was announced. I didn't talk about it a ton here. I talked about it, of course, in the 3DS episode, because that Switch release is a remake of the 3DS game. That can only be a personal Game of the Year choice. That can't be a 2021 release of the year because that game originally came out in 2016. I look at a game that came out of nowhere that I'm so disappointed that I'm finally discussing now, but Big is the word I'm trying to say here. Big Brain Academy, Brain versus Brain. That is largely based on content from the original DS Big Brain Academy and the Big Brain Academy Wii degree, or Big Brain Academy for Wii, if you're one of the PAL European folks out there listening to this. A lot of the content in Brain versus Brain is games from Wii degree, so I can't be the 2021 release of the year. If anything, ironically, a lot of the games that I would probably pick for my 2021 release of the year, had I picked them up, now just end up being Backlog MVP choices, which I will get to describing that when we get to Backlog MVP here. In fact, when I was putting together most of this list, I realized that, a lot of these games that I nominated as games that are like, I wish I had played this next, they're all like new games. Except, I mean, 1 is like kind of based on old stuff, kind of, not really. The game itself is new because it's a sequel. But I digress. We'll talk about that shortly. But if I really want to follow my rules for the release of 2021, there only really ended up being 2 games that I played this past year that qualified for that category. And again, I don't want people to make people think that I think these 2 that I picked that no, they're really not that great of games, but they're only games that are based on like a lot of new stuff that I really enjoyed this year. Because I probably still would have nominated both of these games for my 2021 release of the year. Again, partially because they are new games that came out in 2021 that I enjoyed. But all I'm really trying to say here is I made this mistake of not playing a lot of new releases for the given year, in this case 2021, and I need to correct that here in 2022, hopefully. So the 2 games that I have nominated here are WarioWare Get It Together and the game that ended up winning it. And I'm a little sad that I picked this, as much as I still like enjoy the game for what it is, and it's Mario Golf Super Rush. But before we talk about that, I want to give WarioWare its due, because it's not a game that I discuss a ton. I basically talked about it in the 3 episode. So I got 3 games for Christmas, which has not happened in a long time. Granted, I bought 2 of them, and it's, again, Big Brain Academy. And the other one I bought was Mario Party Superstars, which that really could have been my personal game of the year if it hadn't been for a certain other game releasing earlier this year. If you know me at all, I think it's pretty obvious what my personal game of the year for 2021 was, but we'll get to that shortly. It was not Mario Party Superstars, but that would have been a really good choice. I would have really loved to pick it. Except it's largely based on old content. But I digress. I want to give WarioWare here its due, because that was the 3rd game. That was the only one that I actually bought for me for Christmas as like an actual gift, that I didn't just buy with like money that I received for Christmas. And, I think Get It Together is an interesting game. It's actually the first WarioWare game I've played. I picked up Gold not too long ago, but I never got to like really fully play it, because I'm still looking for that darn 3DS wherever it's gone missing to. I know it's around. I know it exists. I just have to find it. But Get It Together is an interesting game. I enjoy it. It's essentially WarioWare, like typical WarioWare micro games, but you play as a character within the game. So it changes the way that you approach each given micro game depending on who you have to play as. The only problem I really find with it is it's not really light on content. Like, I feel like, I will get my gift giver's $50 out of it, but it feels like there is a certain, like, ceiling with it, if that makes sense. Like, it's a sort of game that it's like, if I'm in the mood for it, I'll play it, but then I'll probably put it away again for a while, which is really sad, because I think it should have that sort of long-term appeal. I beat the story mode in a matter of a couple of days, and that's really the only way that you just get to play a bunch of micro games in a row. Otherwise, when you go to the practice, you just pick one micro game, or when you go to the other modes, you get like certain setups, and again, it's fine, but it's just not exactly what I'm looking for. And that sometimes that just is what it is. It's what you gotta deal with. So, but Mario Golf Super Rush, the other game that I've nominated here, the only really other original game I played this year. I'm trying to remember to the exact sort of verbiage I used in the review I did of the game not earlier this year, but last year, I guess, at this point now. And Mario Golf feels like there was a lot of potential for it, and I'm not sure if it just did not sell as many units as Nintendo had hoped, so they just decided to drop support for the game prematurely, or what exactly it was, but I was kind of hoping that since we knew we'd be getting future updates, like they talked about this at E3, that it would get like significant content for a while. And instead, the game only really got 3 updates with like a new course and 1 or 2 new characters. And then the second one was like 2 courses and 1 or 2 new characters. And the third one was the same exact sort of deal here. And, you know, the problems that Mario Golf Super Rush faced wasn't really that it needed more characters or more courses. I mean, you know, there's nothing wrong with that. I like that. But what it needed was sort of like a refinement of the modes or of just the core gameplay. And it never really got that. But that all being said, you know, I enjoy golf games. I really enjoy Mario Golf. In some ways, I feel like Super Rush is like underappreciated because it deviates too much from classic Mario Golf. But in other ways, I also feel like it's kind of appropriately rated for what it's gotten, because some things like XC Golf, which I finally beat, like, well, probably a month or 2 ago at this point. I was just like, I am determined to beat XC Golf, and I finally did it and got to move on to the next world. But it's just like, you know, if you don't care for the adventure mode, you're not going to get like a ton of time out of the game necessarily, unless you just really like playing golf, which, I mean, you know, it's fortunate that I do enjoy playing golf, but I kind of wish the gameplay itself was more refined and that there was a greater variety of modes, not of characters and courses. But, you know, by and large, it's still Mario Golf. I still have to like it in a sense, if only because I enjoy Mario Golf itself. Not really Mario Golf 64 so much, but, you know, things post that I find are pretty good. But suffice it to say, had I played more original games, it would have remained a nominee and not the victor. I probably would have picked one of the games. Well, I'm looking at the list of ones that I definitely nominated for Backlog MVP here. I don't think I would have picked one of these necessarily, but I probably would have picked at least something a little bit different depending on what I played in 2021. But for personal game of the year, like I said, there were a lot of contenders. I could have picked Miitopia. That was fantastic. I played a lot of Pikmin 3 Deluxe this year, despite the fact, I don't remember if I ever mentioned that I picked up Pikmin 3 Deluxe, because it was like half price randomly at Target in spring. I was just like, well, geez, I'm never going to see it at half price anytime soon here. And I want to play it. I really like Pikmin, and of course Pikmin 3 is my favorite Pikmin game. So I was like, I may as well pick it up, if only because it's like, I'm never going to see this deal again, and I want to support the series, so, geez, I'll go for it. And I would say I've warmed up to it a lot more now, but I'm wondering how much of that is just because Pikmin 3 is really good, and not necessarily the Deluxe is really good, but I've come around a little bit more on the controls, although I still have problems with it. Like I said, Mario Party Superstars is fantastic. I love all the boards in the game. I wish there was a larger character selection, kind of like Super Mario Party. The fact that there are only 2 Mario Party 8 minigames in Mario Party Superstars is a crime, but that's mostly because, you know, that's the era that I'm nostalgic for. And speaking of which, the fact that they're calling us Superstars, and I get why they do this, I get why they did it this way, the fact that they limited it all to console content and that there was no handheld content at all, when I'm just saying Mario Party DS is the best Mario Party of all time, no questions, like, you know, just no discussion on that, is also a crime. But, you know, for what it is, I really enjoy it. It's Mario Party, and with really good boards and really good minigames, and I can play it online. That's great. I love that. Super Mario Party is kind of the same. Not as good at boards, but I can play it online. It's got really good minigames. It's got pretty decent boards. Although I also can't play the randoms, so that's the point in Mario Party Superstars favorite. I should point out that too. I can just play with random people whenever I want. Except for when I'm here, of course, but you know, that's a whole totally much earlier segment that I don't need to go back into right now. But I've had fun with the game. I've really enjoyed what I played. Trying to think what other one. Oh, Big Rain Academy. I just talked about that. I love all the remakes of a bunch of the old games. I wouldn't quite call it my favorite game of the year, although I mean, it was definitely $30 well spent. I've gotten a good chunk of time out of it. But I don't think there's any question knowing the fact that I devoted a whole podcast to it, the fact that I made a point of talking about, hyping responsibly around this particular game. My 2021 game of the year, even though I haven't beaten it yet, even the first one, it's the Great Ace Attorney Chronicles. When I got it in July, I beat the first case. It was shockingly long. I wasn't really prepared for how long Ryunosuke Naruhodo's first trial would be, because I'm so used to the first case being like 2 or 3 hours long. This ended up being like 5 hours. Very long case, especially for such a simple case. And then from there, it's just like, it was nice to see an Ace Attorney game. First off, one was written by Shu Takumi again, so the writing's a little bit stronger than what we've had in the second trilogy. Not that I, the second trilogy is still fine. It's definitely not the stronger of the two mainline trilogies. But it was nice to see the series kind of break some conventions, things that like you usually expect out of Ace Attorney games, like having a long first case. As much as I didn't think it paid off, it's nice to see them try something a little different, to be like, okay, we have this all trial case. Let's try to make it a little bit longer than just a couple of hours. Second case, all investigation. Of course, we get introduced to the dance of deduction. I talked about that in the E3 segment where I talked about the Great Ace Attorney Chronicles, where you're working with Sherlock Holmes, not Sherlock Holmes, unless you're in Japan, where he is Sherlock Holmes. No, Sherlock Holmes, the great detective of London, England. And we get to figure out a whole case investigation, a la Ace Attorney investigations, although it obviously wasn't like that. It was just using the normal mainline series gameplay. Then we go into the third case, all trial. Normally that's reserved for the fourth case, and the fourth case is usually shorter. In this case, then the fourth, in this case, that's bad terminology, bad use of words there since I'm just saying the word case a lot. Fourth case comes around. This is where I've stopped. I need to play the fifth case. I said the Great Ace Attorney Chronicles would be the game that would get me through fall 2021. Ended up being a lot of other stuff, but I still played it quite a bit. The fourth case, it was your first investigation, like real like investigation, go to trial, and then beat the case sort of idea here. Again, just breaking all these like normal, like this is how we expect an Ace Attorney game to go. At the same time, though, one of the things that I have to say about it in trying to break these conventions is, in some ways, it's kind of nice having the Great Ace Attorney Adventures and the Great Ace Attorney 2 Resolve being in the same game here, in that I'm basically just calling the Resolve cases 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10, because I feel like if these were two separate games still, and I had played them on the 3DS originally, like if they had come out in that past world, or just in the past, as they probably originally were intended to, I don't think I would have enjoyed these as much. Because my main problem that's been overarching with these cases is it feels like it kind of feels like they're playing the long game, where it feels like Takumi more or less just should have written like a 10 case sort of like giant game that tells the whole story all at once, because it feels like things are either happening, well, it's mostly too late, I would say. Like it feels like we were introduced to investigation gameplay in the second case, but we didn't meet our prosecutor until the third case. We didn't get introduced to the new gameplay and the trials, like the summation examination, until the third case. We didn't get introduced to... Well, actually, no, we did have multi-witness gameplay in the first case. So I'm wrong on that. I was about to talk about that, but I would have been wrong. Just all sorts of new things are happening, but they're just happening a little later. We have Sherlock Holmes in the second case. It doesn't show up in the third case at all. So our detective character, he's like one of our detective characters. He's like our friend. But the actual like mainline in-game detective doesn't show up until the 4th case of the game. You know, he's kind of thought about in the 3rd case a little bit. Not really, but never seen until case 4. You know, in the original game, Detective Gumshoe shows up in case 2 already. And of course, we meet Edgeworth, the prosecutor, in case 2, the mainline like prosecutor of the game, I should say. So we're having like these conventions broken, but in the process of doing that, some things need to be introduced later. And part of that, I think, is in service of the plot of the game. I don't want to give too much away. Obviously, if you're a fan of Ace Attorney, this is going to mean a lot more to you than it is if you're just somebody who's like interested in what is this guy's game of the year here. I highly recommend you pick up the game. If you enjoy visual novels, but I understand if this seems like an insufficient explanation to you because you don't get to have all of the important context here. But you know, the general plot is you have Ryunosuke Naruhodo. He's Phoenix Wright's ancestor, and he travels to merry old England. Without going into spoilers as to why he's going there and how exactly he ends up there, the point is, 1st case, it's at home in his native Japan. 2nd case, he's on a ship to England. 3rd case, he's finally in England and has to go through trials. And now, finally, at the 5th case, we actually just have, like, this is Naruhodo's legal consultancy or something. But at this point, it's like, I would have expected this earlier in the game. And I don't know if, you know, the way that could have been resolved is necessarily by not having the 2nd case be on the ship, or if it's by like just doing something different. But I think this is more a review, I guess, of the Great Ace Attorney Adventures than anything else, than a description of why it's my game of the year. But I don't think there's any question. I've enjoyed the game. I knew it would be my game of the year when it was like officially revealed. You know, there hadn't been a new Ace Attorney game, like an actual brand new one, in 5 years at that point. Although I did play Ace Attorney Investigations 2, the English fan translation earlier this year, or in September and August and September of 2021. So I really had 2 brand new Ace Attorney experiences this past year. But as far as official ones are concerned, it was clearly going to be the Great Ace Attorney Chronicles that would win out. Now let's talk about Backlog MVP as well. Apologies for like the very like strong sip of water there, but I coughed there. Backlog MVP. This is like something that I'm pushing to make like a brand new category in Game of the Year discussions. What was the game that you wanted to get to in a particular year that you just didn't get to, but it's just like, you know, this is the most valuable player on the backlog that I should play. Spoiler alert regarding my 2020 backlog list. I could have made this one the exact same one because I don't think I touched a single one of those games that I listed as like nominees for Backlog MVP in 2020 in the year 2021. But I felt like that would be a little lazy to just reuse the same list. So I made a new one here of games that I missed out in 2021 that would be like great choices. And honestly, actually looking at this, I realized I didn't actually pick one as a winner here, but they're just like a bunch of games that I missed out in 2021 that I really wish I had played. Like Psychonauts 2 came out, which of course means I'd have to play Psychonauts 1 first. So, and I think those 2 games are a great example of what I was talking about when it comes to like, hey, I need some hardware diversity because I can only play Psychonauts 1 and I think 2 on PC. And this here little laptop, as much as I love it, as much as I love this little Lenovo laptop here that's got my power cord and my nice microphone here hooked up to it, it is not powerful enough, I think, to play Psychonauts 1 or 2. Maybe 1. I'm not certain on it. But, you know, if let's say I had a PS4, or ideally an Xbox Series X, which can play Psychonauts 1 and 2, I probably would have played them already, and Psychonauts 2 probably would have been in 2021 release of the year running, and Psychonauts probably could have been in personal game of the year running, because I hear they're supposed to be very good 3D platformers, and I love me a good 3D platformer. I've been playing Banjo-Kazooie on that N64 Switch Online. Also, spoilers. I did pick up the Switch Online expansion pack, but remember what I said when I talked about that. I guess we're going into this brief tangent. I would only pay, I would pay $30 for it. Happy coincidence, a family member had just randomly picked me up a $20 eShop gift card, just for like me having done a favor for them earlier in the year, when I was still mostly at home. So I was like, okay, well now I only have to spend 30 of my own dollars towards a Switch Online expansion pack subscription. So I'm going to try it out for a year, see how I like it, see if I get a lot of use out of it. And I've been playing some of the N64 games on there, but mostly Banjo-Kazooie. So I'm just saying, I would probably really enjoy Psychonauts and Psychonauts 2 had I been able to pick them up earlier this year. And it sounds like Psychonauts 2 really actually lived up to the hype. Well, actually, I'm trying to remember all of the reception to it. In what little I heard about it, I think it lived up to the hype of, many years between Psychonauts and its sequel as being a fantastic follow-up. Although it sounds like there are definitely still some plot things that are just like, it would have been nice if those had gotten resolved, or like instead of left hanging for a third game or something, it just would have been nice. Other games, Cruise and Blast. I picked, when was the last time I got a new racing game? It might have been Team Sonic Racing in late 2019, like CTR and Team Sonic Racing. I want a new racing game in my life. And I think, I haven't had an actual arcade racer, like something that I'd play. I could play Cruise and Blast in the arcades. In fact, I've seen machines for it. I'd love to pick it up. I want an arcade racer. I do have Horizon Chase Turbo, so I should probably just play that if anything. But I want to see something a little more modern too. So I'm disappointed that I didn't get to pick that up this year, especially when it's like not quite a budget title, but like a $40 game, $30, $40, $50 game. It'd be a nice little sweet add-on to the list here. But one that I have here on the list of my backlog MVP, actually the one that I think would be the one that I would probably nominate as like the actual winner, is Kaze and the Wild Masks. Which, if you've never heard of it, it's supposed to be, I really hope I talked about this in that episode. It's kind of like a spiritual-ish successor to the Rareware era of Donkey Kong Country. And man, oh man, that would make me very happy to play a sort of newish, like, classic Donkey Kong Country. Not that there's anything wrong with the Retro Studios Donkey Kong Countries. In fact, I really enjoyed Returns. Although I wish I'd played Tropical Freeze a little bit more. But it'd just be fun to have, like, a sprite-based throwback to, this is like what I think of when I think of Donkey Kong Country. And actually, speaking of which, I wish I'd gotten a little further in all of them in Switch Online in the SNES service. I'm at Creme Croc Industries in Donkey Kong Country 1, but DKC 2 and 3, I'm still stuck at the start of those. But Kaze seems like, it's sort of like a sleeper, like, it was one that, like, the people who really like it talked about it a lot. But people who didn't pick it up didn't really talk about, it didn't like light the world on fire like some other games did. I just think it'd be really interesting. Now, this is probably a pretty controversial game to have as a nominee for Backlog MVP here. But I'm going to put Balan Wonderworld on the list. If only because, so I played the demo on the Switch, which I realize is the worst running and the worst looking version, and I cannot deny that game looks horrible on Switch. And it looks like halfway decent on the PS4 and the PS5 and the Xbox Series X and Xbox One. It looks like, like a lot better than the Switch version. And I hear it's supposed to be like really like super duper simplistic. But I don't mind a little super duper simplicity in my games once in a while. I kind of compared it to, and I'm sure some people will be insulted by this, but I kind of compare it to like the original Game Boy Kirby's Dream Land, and where it's like, I just need something, sometimes you just need that super easy, super simple game. And I think Balan Wonderworld is sort of like the modern take on it, but I probably wouldn't pick it up for more than $20. But it's just like, let's say the game really is as bad as people describe it as being. I have to see that. I had fun with what I did play. And some, transformations in the game, like I think one is called it can't be the Fox Box, because that's the name of a segment on a TV channel that doesn't play anymore. I'm saying Fox is still around, but like the Fox Box, that was the name of like the kids segment on Fox apparently in like the 2000s. Like when I was a little kid at that point. I never really watched it, but I've heard a lot about it. But one of the transformations of the game just randomly turns you into a box at some point, which is great, when you're jumping platforms, to get turned into an unmovable box in the middle of the air where you just plummet to the ground. So I have to see, like, is this really as bad as people are saying, or is it just like aggressively mediocre, or will I find a little golden nugget in there somewhere where I'll enjoy it? It's added to it's got to be on the backlog. I have to play it at some point. But not necessarily because it's good, so it feels like it'd be wrong to like actually have it be the winner here. And the last bit, the last game I have on this list, but really I could have put on like just a whole ton of games that I missed out in 2021 here, but it's new Pokemon Snap. That is one of the few major releases that I missed out in the year. The other one probably at this point is Skyward Sword HD, although I didn't pick up Metroid Dread either, mostly because I've never really cared for Metroid. I tried out the demo, I will admit. I did try out the Metroid Dread demo when it came out, and Emmy freaks me out. I cannot stand those Emmy zones. But new Pokemon Snap, I always wanted to play Pokemon Snap when I saw it on like it was on the Wii Virtual Console actually, but I never picked it up on there because I never really had money to buy games on the Wii Virtual Console back in the day because I was a small child. And, it closed before I was like, oh, I should just pick up money and just put a bunch of money for WiiWare and Wii Virtual Console games. Instead, I bought like 3DS games and Wii U games instead. But Pokemon Snap was one that I was always interested in. I don't know what it is about Pokemon. I don't know if I've talked about this on here, but when it comes to Pokemon, I could really care less. Well, I you know what I'm trying to say here. I don't really care much for the mainline sort of stuff. It's never really interested me. I even tried it out. I tried Pokemon Y, I think was the one that I rented. I would have rather had X because I just think X is a cooler letter. But, they had Y at the rental store. So I was like, I feel like I should, it seems like it's a rite of passage. And I just, I couldn't get into it. Something about the idea of trying to catch 700, even 400, even 300 creatures, just like that's too much. But the spin-offs I think are all pretty neat. So I picked up Pokemon Tournament. That's why I want to pick up new Pokemon Snap. What other ones are around there? Actually, there haven't been like a ton. Oh, Detective Pikachu. I had to pick up Detective Pikachu on the 3DS. Apparently there should be a sequel on Switch, so if that ever finally releases, I'll pick that up. I liked the Detective Pikachu movie. I thought it was pretty darn good. But, I think the other reason I'd want to try it out is I haven't had a good Reich? Wow, what am I saying here? I haven't had a good rail shooter in a while. I finally have played the original Star Fox 64 using N64 Switch Online, but outside of that, I haven't played, outside of Star Fox, I should just say, I haven't really played many rail shooters, and I want to try more of them because, if Star Fox is fun, I think other rail shooters, as a general rule, should be pretty fun. And I think, Pokemon Snap is just it's a photography rail shooter, which is it's just got that little extra level of whimsy in it that makes it that much more interesting. But that is the 2021 Game of the Year discussion. Overall, I think the lesson here for me is, I wish I had more time to play more games, but dang it, I have to start being an adult here, and that means missing out on that sort of stuff. So who knows what the future will hold for the 2022 Game of the Year discussion next January. But some of the only one that I thought was pretty darn predictable is the Great Ace Attorney Chronicles. In fact, I think my 2022 Game of the Year, it's going to end up being a release of the year because it's coming out next year. I think it's going to be pretty predictable if anyone's been following the independent game news here and knows how much I like a certain game that is a spiritual successor to Genesis Sonic the Hedgehog. I'm, of course, talking about, I'm real excited for Freedom Planet 2 coming out in spring of 2022. So I think that's probably going to be my Game of the Year. Spoilers for the discussion that's coming up in a long time from now. But that is the end of that.